Hi everyone. For my great text defense, I'll be discussing the Stephen King short story, The Answer Man. The Answer Man is pretty short. It's only 50 pages. It came out last year, and it's a collection of short stories by Stephen King called You Like It Darker. So I think that The Answer Man would be perfect for the listening seminar because it's pretty easy to understand, it's engaging, relatable, and very well written. And even though the story isn't necessarily about religion, again, I think it would be perfect for the listening seminar because there's a lot of overlap between certain Benedictine values such as community service, hospitality, loving one another, humility, and loving thy neighbor. And at the same time, the story also delves into some more heavy themes such as life, death, empathy, and overcoming adversity and what it means to live a meaningful life. And I think that reading The Answer Man and listening seminar would help students begin to reflect on their personal and professional career paths in terms of, well, what do they want to do with their lives and what do they want out of it? And I think that The Answer Man would also help students start to consider what are they going to do with what they've learned at St. Vincent and how are they going to use that to help their communities and help other people once they graduate. And I think that The Answer Man would be very complementary to the Chittister reading on listening. I'll discuss that later. So the story follows a young man named Phil Parker through different stages of his life. And the story starts out in 1937 where Phil and his fiancée Sally Ann. So Phil is a recent Harvard grad who is faced with a difficult decision. He can decide whether he wants to work with his father at a prestigious firm in Boston or to stay in Curry, New Hampshire, where he knows he'll be happier. While driving, Phil encounters the Answer Man. The Answer Man is this mysterious figure who sits at a lemonade stand, and he charges, say, $20 for 3 minutes. And during those 3 minutes, or however long, Phil can ask any question, and the Answer Man will give him an answer. And it's during this interaction that Phil learns that the future's looking up for Curry, the town is going to prosper, and his parents will eventually come around to the idea of him marrying Sally Ann and staying in Curry. But there is going to be a war, and the Answer Man tells Phil that he's going to be in the war, but he'll come out unscathed. And once again, the Answer Man is going to appear 2 more times throughout the short story. He's going to appear once again when Phil is happily married, well established, well respected, a war hero, and a father. And the last time Phil will run into the Answer Man is at the end of his life. And a couple years later, just as the Answer Man predicted, World War II starts and Phil enlists in the Marine Corps. He's deployed to the Pacific, and he's later awarded the Medal of Honor. And so Phil comes home unscathed, and he returns to his wife and 3-year-old son Jake. And everything's coming together for Phil. Curry is prospering, his firm is thriving, he has a son he can play baseball with, he takes him to the Yankees games, and they get to bond and watch spaghetti westerns together. Life is good. Life seems like it's going smoothly until Jake is diagnosed with leukemia and passes away 8 months later at the age of 10. And his wife, Sally Ann, eventually, she spirals into a depression and becomes an alcoholic. And Phil tries to get her help, but she refuses. And then one night, Phil gets a knock at the door, and he learns that Sally Ann's car veered into the side of a bridge, and she passed away in the accident. And Phil is left with a bunch of difficult questions that no one can really answer, like, why me? Why my son? Why my wife? And for years, Phil is lost in this grief and depression until he eventually finds his purpose in helping a severely disabled burn victim seek justice for her family. And this woman's name is Christine. Christine wants to sue the company that was responsible for the wiring in her home, because it was the faulty wiring in her home that caused a fire that killed her family, her husband and 5 children, and left her severely disabled. And like every waking moment of her life, she's in pain. And after 5 years, Phil wins the case, and he's able to expose the corporation for their negligence. But unfortunately, Christine passes away before the case is settled and the award is given to her brother-in-law. And so Phil is inspired by Christine, and he devotes the rest of his life to doing pro bono work for the community and volunteering. But I want to say a couple decades later, Phil is diagnosed with a brain tumor, but he refuses surgery because he doesn't like the odds, and he accepts his fate with his motto, always remember others have it worse. And I think that The Answer Man would be great to read alongside the Chittister text, or Chittister chapter on listening. A major critique that Chittister makes in her chapter is that with modern society and modern Christianity, there's this disconnect between the spiritual practice and real-world engagement. And what I mean by that is, let me see. So a personal anecdote that Chittister gives is that when she was a young nun, she says that they would pray all the time, 7 times a day in multiple languages. And on page 18, she says, "We prayed a great deal when I was a young nun, but no one ever came to our dining room. No poor slept in our houses. No one even thought to look to us for clothing or shelter. We lived in one world, people lived in another." And I think that The Answer Man would be a great compliment to read next to the Chittister text, because with Phil, he puts that theory into practice. Even though we don't know if Phil is Catholic, we can see that Phil listens to the people around him, and he helps his community, and he actually puts the money where his mouth is. And so Chittister also points out that to not listen then is not to grow, and to be unable to listen is to be unable to give. And there's this idea here that we need to listen to the world around us if we want to change the world and change ourselves. And this theme resonates throughout The Answer Man, and so far as it's through listening to others, especially Christine. It's through that listening that Phil is able to heal and find his purpose again. And it's through helping others, helping the poor, volunteering, and bettering his community that Phil is able to overcome all that tragedy in his life and live a meaningful life. And so I'll end with a quote from The Answer Man, page 394. And this is after Christine passed, and after Christine passed, and after his wife passed and his son passed. "So time passed, so the story was told. For the most part, it was good time. There were scars, but not disfiguring ones. And what were scars after all, but wounds that had healed?